long, white, and he recoils back. It's on fire, and he realizes that's not the flesh of a pig. That's a human being. And
Oh,
what he was looking at was a woman's body. She was 100% naked. She's in the ditch, in the grass. She's on fire. It's very much dead.
I'm Bruce Figger, a veterinarian living in Sylvia, Kansas, and you're listening to the Vance Crow Podcast.
welcome back to the podcast. I'm glad you're here. Today, we talk with Chris Bennett. Longtime listeners know Chris is one of my favorite guests, and that's because he can talk about just about anything. He is probably the scariest journalist, maybe in the United States, but definitely in the world of agriculture, because he brings up topics that people are not normally talking about. Lately, the reason I called up Chris and said, hey, let's get on the podcast is he did another issue on curtilage and the government coming onto your land and putting cameras and being able to look around on your property if it's away from where your yard and house is. And Chris is trying to sound the alarm to say, this is such an infringement on our property rights. People should really be paying attention to this. So Chris and I have a wild 2-hour discussion, and I hope you enjoy it. You are seeing me run around quite busy lately. It is because we are moving into the new podcast studios where we are doing legacy interviews. If you would like me to interview your loved one, to tell their stories about their childhood, their career, marriage, how they parented, and the legacy that they want to leave behind, then you can go to legacyinterviews.com to find out more. Thanks so much and enjoy this fantastic conversation with my man, Chris Bennett. Chris Bennett, welcome back to the podcast.
Vance, thank you, sir. It's a privilege to be here, man. Hope you're doing great.
Well, you are in the ag journalism world, so I'm going to ask you probably what seems like the obvious question, which is, why is it that people are so enthralled with the Johnny Depp Amber Heard case? Why was this something that captured the attention of our country?
Man, you tell me, Vance. I really don't know. I have seen the headlines. I hadn't followed any of the footage. I mean, we kind of all grew up in a sense with Johnny Depp. And prior to him, frankly, I'm suspecting people my age and even below never heard of Amber Heard prior to that. But your guess is far better than mine. Pretty wild, though.
You know, the weirdest thing for me is that you get to see not only into the lives of celebrities and you find out, hey, these are just actually people with all the problems that regular people have. But the scariest thing to me is when they've brought on these psychologists. And out of the whole trial, that's probably the thing I've watched the most. And I think there's just something really odd about a culture that says, hey, there's a special group of people. We send them to special school. And if they talk with you for a little while, or they listen to you doing something for a little while, they now can make assessments as to your ability to process information, to decide what's good or bad or right or wrong. And I think that this concept of mental health and psychiatry and psychology is like way off the hook now, and they are a really important part of our judicial system.
I'm right with you, Vance. I tell you what, man, the person beside you, the person, your neighbor and so on, the amount of medications that they're on, everybody knows it's become outrageous. You just assume the other person is taking X, Y, and Z. I remember years ago, I'm not making this up, years ago, when I was teaching high school history, I had one particular class, probably was 22, 23 kids in it. And for some reason, the office let slip to me that 13 or 14 out of them, remember I just said 22, 23 kids, were all on the ADD medicine. I was young at the time, just out of college. But I knew right then, okay, I don't know about ADD. I don't know about all that kind of thing. I do know that there's no way that 14 of those kids out of 22, 23 are on the medication. And it was seen as I don't know what you call it, a badge of honor. They wanted their kids to be diagnosed. And shoot, everybody knows, you can literally get college scholarships for having ADD, So there you go. I'm not picking on ADD. I'm just stating the obvious.
Well, it seems to me like we were really blithe about this. When I was in middle school, that's when I think ADD medication started becoming more and more well known. And you think about what you're doing with the child. And some kids, they really do have brain chemistry problems. But if you solve brain chemistry problems with things that impact the chemistry of the brain, you're playing with something with way long-term consequences. So you're starting to give a child something that's going to change the way their brain processes information, how it processes energy. And these are going to have ramifications far beyond just their inability to sit in 6th grade math. It's going to have an impact on them. And then to the larger point of people are all around us taking medications. I mean, the SSRIs, the drugs that are out there that are trying to treat depression, these things are like infinitely scary to me. They genuinely change the makeup of how the human mind works. And I think there's way too many people on them.
I absolutely agree. I also think, Vance, that I genuinely believe that it plays into the victim culture that we've seen here the last 10 years. People want that checklist of things they can tick off that they have a problem with or associated with. And this just adds, in my opinion, fuel to the fire. It's definitely fodder.
Where do you think that came from? It's like, why is it that we want a victim culture? Is this just normal human nature?
Oh man, Vance, that's a can of worms. I think the opportunity's there. I think the grievance ladder is real. And I think you can ascend up it according to your frailties, perceived or real. And so since the grievance ladder is there, you can literally extend your career, prolong your career, boost your career by climbing those rungs. And when you present that to someone, human nature is going to take over. And so you just end up with tribalization of sorts where, man, let me show you what's wrong with me. And then, shoot, you combine that with social media where everybody wants to air their grievances or air just, hey, here's my laundry. I mean, I'm at the point now, Vance, where if I see people on social media that look happy, my assumption is, you ain't happy, that's just me. But it's I don't know, social media disease that traces back to everything you just said.
Do you use social media?
Mm-mm. Let's see, brother. I used to be on Twitter, not now. I have to be, for work, I have to be on LinkedIn. I have a LinkedIn account that I was required to when I signed on. So I knew that going in. I have a fake Facebook account so that I can follow particular farmers, farming groups, so I can get a reading on what's going on. But as far as me,
what makes it fake? The fact that it's not actually you? I mean, it's if you're able.
Yeah, I just got a fake name that I stole from Monty Python. And so I just put that out there with no fakes. And then I'm in these groups. A lot of the time I get kicked out of the group because I have this stupid name and no face on there. But hey, what are you going to do? But no, I don't have anything against anybody being on social media. That's not my point. But I do believe there is something to the person that does post continuous selfies or pictures, a million pictures of their kids and so on. I definitely think there's some psychology that's going on that ain't too pretty.
Yeah, I'm hypersensitive to the photos of Violet going up on social media, right? Like, and there's something about it which is like just trying to protect her from an unknown future where she might not want those things up there. And it's funny because as a parent, if you encounter other parents that are like really comfortable with their kids being online or really like they take photos and put them up there and like, do you really want to go start a fight about like, hey, take my photo of my kid off there? But on the other hand, you see these people utilize their kids to be able to get magic internet points, which is really just limiting, giving away your privacy in exchange for, fleeting moments of popularity.
Yeah, come on. We all know that there are a large percentage of adults that now live vicariously through their kids on social media. So maybe all of the shortcomings that you once had as a child, as a teenager, in their minds, hey, I'm going to replay it with Junior or Missy, and we're going to get it right this time. All right, then.
Yeah, so you and I started chatting because you came out with another chilling article on the concept of curtilage, right? Where well, I'll just let you tell it, but I can tell you that every time I get one of your articles, I'm like, oh man, okay, let's take a deep breath. We're about to hit the cold water.
Vance, this is a topic that the entire United States, every citizen should be concerned with because it chills to the core. And this is open fields. This is whether, well, the government claims the right to have complete access to your private land, to walk on it and surveil it at length, right? There's just, if you own 100 acres, if you own 5 acres, they have access to it. They can't get to your house. They can't get to the yard, as you said, the arcane term, curtilage around it, but everything else they have open access to. In states, whether you're in Missouri, Ohio, Pennsylvania, according to state law, they may or may not be able to come on your land, state officials. When you get to the federal level, when you get to Fish and Wildlife, all the other agencies, the alphabet agencies, those people have government right, according to the Supreme Court, to come on to your land. And we have a marriage now of that right that they claim with modern technology. So they can surveil you all they want. In other words, if they want to put a camera up on your land, they can do so, not for 2 minutes, forever, as long as they want to, with no warrant, no reasonable suspicion, no judge's eye, no judge's nod. It's just there. I tell you what, when I wrote the article, the latest one, trying to tell people about open fields and warn them, hey, at least take a look at this, which is backed, of course, by the Supreme Court. I called one of the major ag organizations, ag wildlife organizations. I said, hey, would y'all like to comment on this? Just throw out your perspective. No sabotage here. And they declined, did not want to. So that tells you a little bit of the PC nature, the sensitive nature that's, back there with open fields. Because, once you cut through all the bull, Vance, and you get down to something like USDA, you see United States Department of Agriculture, you see the word agriculture at the end, and it almost comes from your core. You just assume, hey, agriculture, it's all good. And then you got to check yourself and realize that USDA is simply another bureaucracy, just like all the other departments. In other words, you would not trust any governmental department any further than you could throw them. At least most people wouldn't. But USDA, we think, again, agriculture, you can't, right? That is a bureaucracy tied in with all the rest, and ramifications, brother, not too good.
So let's talk about the open fields thing, because we could definitely go into the USDA and why I'm so glad that Trump tried to get them out into the Midwest and all the chaos that caused. But tell me a story, man. Like, what does it actually look like? What story does the government tell themselves for why they need to go on somebody's land, and how does this all work out in reality?
It came to a surface back in the 1920s. And of course, when you hear 20s, of course, your mind probably heads toward prohibition, and you'd be right. First case was alcohol related, and it went to Supreme Court, and it basically, again, it went to Supreme Court, and the court decided that the government had the right to go onto someone's land in pursuit of X, Y, and Z for whatever reason. Not into their house, right? The house is protected by the Fourth Amendment, search and seizure. Your person is protected by Fourth Amendment. As you know, the police have to get warrants to infringe on anything related to that. But the land itself, they can access. And that would mean if you've got 1,000 acres back there, they can access your sheds, your buildings, the land itself. They can go into your buildings.
They can go into your sheds and say, hey, let's look at what tools they've got here, what files they have around here.
Essentially, so yes, not if they're beside your house, but if they're not beside your house, which of course many landowners would have this situation. If they're out by themselves, they can access those. That first case happened in the 1920s. The second case that boosted the 1920s decision and gave them complete access to your land, I believe, was in the 80s. and it involved marijuana. So it's pretty interesting that you already have two products that at least have some degree of legalization now that open the door for the government to get onto your land. It's 20s, the 80s, alcohol, marijuana, and I think if I remember right, in the marijuana case, they were on a guy's land, and don't quote me on this, but the buildings got involved. In other words, they could see into the building. They were given access. Every case breaks down different, but I assure you, Vance, at the moment, if you have land, they can access your land. They can come on, do it. And you put a fence up. You can put your no trespassing signs up. You can put your posted signs. You can spray purple paint where you want to. They can still come on. They don't have to tell you. And if they wanted to, they could set up a trail camera or game camera, watch you. If your wife, right, went out there and was engaged in any private activity, maybe using the restroom, what have you, that's on camera. That belongs to them. Not a dang thing you can do about it. They don't have to tell you, right? Now, the question then becomes, does the government have a database of where these cameras are? Does anyone know? Does one agency have to communicate with the other about these game cameras or film cameras, or just people out there taking notes on you? And
well, the obvious
knows
question,
right now.
if you bring that up, if you have a database, can you also FOIA that? So can I write a request and say, hey, I want to know if you guys have collected any information on that property right there, and do they have access to it? And if not, why not? Because I think all that's, information that those bureaucracies capture is supposed to be available for Sunshine. And then if they can, then that's a real problem, right? You shouldn't. There just seems like this is fraught with challenges.
Big 10-4, Vance. Let me put it this way. It's under FOIA right now. It's under FOIA as we speak. I don't know when the information will pour out or dribble out, but I'll tell your audience something about FOIA, and this is very distressing, as with most things involving government power. I did a story on a case 2 or 3 years ago with a guy who was being pressed on by EPA, FWS, and several organizations regarding his land. He'd done nothing wrong. They were coming on to his land. He FOIA'd those organizations' emails related to his case. It took him 6 months or a year. And when he got the information back, it simply wasn't there. In other words, it looked like they gave him a quarter or half of the material. Now, he's embroiled in litigation, right? So when he doesn't get the FOIA material, Vance, he has a choice. I can either, reapply, or I can kick off litigation to get them to give me the FOIA stuff. So imagine, right? What in the heck do you do as a U.S. citizen when you FOIA and you sons of guns just didn't even give me half the material I asked for? So you have that game out there as well. Just outrageous behavior, once again, from people that are, I emphasize, unelected, right? Bureaucrats, unelected, and they are in for life. And you tell me when the last time one of them got fired. In any of these cases, it's usually just, hey, a transfer or nothing happens.
So what's been bringing this up with you, the open fields? I mean, you said yourself it's been going on since the 1920s, then marijuana in the 80s and 90s. Why now are you taking the time and energy to write about this?
Well, to put it bluntly, I think this is a Mount Rushmore issue. This is a fundamental issue for Americans. I can't explain to you how and why it has gone under the radar, but everyone has to know about this because of the creep in every area of our lives related to government. If you don't make a stand and draw a line, the creep always gets closer and closer. And for those of the audience listening that say, hey, look, I have some game wardens in my family, or I have friends with game wardens, or I know the game wardens in my county, the government officials in my county, and they're all good people. I'm not going to argue about that. I can entirely believe that. I have no problem with that. The point is, that a rogue is going to take advantage. And whether you are a teacher, a lawyer, a reporter, what have you, you're going to have some rogues, right? You're going to have plenty of bad apples in any profession. So in the government agency, you're going to have plenty of bad apples, just like in all other professions. And do I, as an American, want to present them with a revolving door onto our land? Absolutely not. I'll give you a chilling example, just absolutely chilling. I think that's the third or fourth time I've used that word so far, and I mean it. If they have a camera set up on your land, that camera can point onto your curtilage. It can point to your house, to your lawn. They can pick up what they want. Now, we all know as human beings what goes on outdoors sometimes in the privacy of someone's land. You might have a daughter, a wife, a girlfriend out there sunbathing. Somebody might be engaged in sexual activity if they thought they were genuinely on their private property, minding their own business. All these things are sitting there exposed, right? We as Americans are exposed. And in this day and age, I don't think I'm just spouting my opinion here. I think you can see from history what's happening. The government's grip on us, the government's command over us is getting stronger, and it's getting stronger by the decade.
Yeah, and to your point, like, even if you don't have a wife or daughter or girlfriend sunbathing or any of those things, you may just not want somebody looking at you. I ended up, when I bought my house, the highest priority I had, the number one priority that I had, was that I could have privacy in the backyard. Because I've lived in places, apartments, small houses, where I didn't have privacy, where my neighbors would ask me about conversations they heard me having in my backyard before. So for me, having privacy is a very big deal. And what I want to use that privacy for is completely irrelevant. It has no bearing on whether or not I should have that privacy. And so the idea that there is like an area that you get to kind of be private, but then if you get outside of that curtilage area, now you own that property, but you don't really own it because somebody can just walk on it and trespass and you can't stop them.
Bingo, Vance. I mean, you tell me if we could haul Tommy Jefferson and John Adams out of the grave, and we could ask them, hey, did y'all intend to allow the feds onto our private land, carte blanche? I can tell you straight up, I know how those gentlemen would answer, and that they would give you an answer that was filled with expletives, and they would roll in their graves to find out that the government now has that power or claims that power.
Yeah, like, let's talk about government power, because it's such an interesting thing. I've been going around and asking people questions about inflation, because to me, something that I have thought about, I've done podcasts about this since way before COVID, about runaway inflation and how this will impact people. And, for a long time, people said, no, there's not going to be inflation. Now people are saying, yeah, well, so here's what I do. I ask people, do you think inflation's getting worse? And almost everyone that I talk with says, well, I think it's actually probably gone as high as it's going to go, and it may level out for a while, but it's going to come down. And then I ask him another question, and I'll ask you this question. What is gas right now where you're located? How much does it cost?
$4+. I don't know about today, Vance, but I'm going to say $4.10.
$4.10. And what is it normally?
Oh, shoot, man. It ought to be in the twos.
Yeah. And do you think 6 months from now, gas will be higher or lower than it is right now?
Man, if you force me to bet I'm 6 months, I'm going to say higher.
Yeah. And how about a year?
I do not know. Again, if you force me to guess, I'm going to say higher.
Yeah. That's the funny thing about this conversation about inflation, because most people say, I think gas is going to keep going up. Well, gas is like the foundational thing. This is how we get supplies everywhere. So if you're worried about your food costs going up, well, if the cost to transport that food goes up, even if you kept everything else the same, all the inputs and all of that, now you're going to be paying more. I think there's a lot of farmers that thought, man, we're really in the clear here because we've cleared all of our input costs. We bought our seeds already. We already pre-bought our herbicides and our fungicides. But they were not imagining what happens if you have to pay $6 a gallon for fuel. And how in the world do you get out of an environment where it costs you twice as much to get across your fields as it used to?
Right, Vance, and the great unknown here is the great fear factor. No one has a clue. If I was to open the crystal ball and say, Vance, gas at this time next year is going to be $7, man. It's going to be $7. I don't think you would laugh. I don't think most people would laugh. I think they would raise their eyebrows and say, okay, I don't think that's going to happen, but yeah, I can believe that. So same thing with food prices. When you extrapolate out, we are in uncharted waters, and there's obviously, right, even if you are as left-wing as you could get on the planet, nobody has confidence in what's coming out of Washington, D.C. You may be coasting, you may stick your head in the sand as an ostrich, but nobody actually speaks with confidence. So where she goes, nobody knows. And that's one of the crazy things right now about commodity prices in the ag market is when you get right down to it, it's very difficult to make any kind of reasonable forecast, because now you're playing with Russia, Ukraine. You can see Taiwan on the horizon. It's absolute head scratcher. And we both know this, that this next year, you're going to throw a couple of more wild cards in there that we simply don't know are coming. And then you extrapolate out and you realize I'm standing on sand. We are all standing on sand.
Do
Not
you
even to
feel like
mention
regular
Bitcoin
people
stuff.
think we're standing on sand? Because I talk with people and they say things like, you know what, the government's just not going to let the economy get out of control. And my perception is they don't have any control over it here, right? Like the Fed, doing this thing they call a soft landing seems like insane talk to me. Like your cat being able to drive your car or something like that. It's not possible.
I agree, fella, and I'll give you a bottom line answer. If you want to know what the government really thinks, go back to the New Green Deal, that first one, the very first one that was floated. And when you look in the details of the first one that was floated prior to the edits, that gives you a pretty dang good blueprint of what they would do if they could. And when you see that, it's an absolute head scratcher. Look, if you want to go down the road of electricity and so on as the great salvific force, or wind energy and so on, more power to you. But you can't go down that road until that road is established. You can't just start hacking through the woods saying, hey, this is going to work. The idea that we're sitting here with gas at this price and we have the pipelines cut, for example, you can't make this up. If you'd have told me all this, Vance, just 10 years ago, 4 years ago, just a couple of years ago, I would not have believed you. I'd have said, Vance, you're off, man. You're off.
Yeah, and the when you think about inflation, this is one of those things that people think about it as like, oh, what is the amount of inflation? I had a guy on the podcast point this out, where he said, there's no such thing as a single number for inflation. It's not 8% inflation. It's your gas price has gone up. I mean, for us here in Missouri, it's up $2. So it's up maybe 45% from what it normally is. Do we count that as inflation, or is that just supply problems? And then you look at food prices and you look at how much is it costing to have the electricity on in your house? Like all of these prices creeping up at varying degrees. I think when people think about it being 8%, it's just some sort of like lunacy, just like an inability to do math or something.
Lance, you said it, brother. Lunacy, right? There's an air of lunacy. It's like a lunacy blanket that covers everything right now. You feel surreal, or at least a surreal environment. You see the headlines in the news every day, and you just wonder what's next. I can only speak as a average Joe American on the street, but the degree of lunacy, maybe it all relates back to the grievance ladder. I don't know. the degree of lunacy in this country has just gone exponential, and I don't know how we get it back on track. Everybody seems like they want to be the exception. Everybody wants to be the exception. Everybody wants to be special, when I guess everybody needs a kick in the hiney.
So let's change the subject and get outside of your normal wheelhouse and ask you, do you think Vladimir Putin is as insane as the media portrays him to be?
I don't, Vance. I don't at all. I mean, he's a Russian dictator and always has been. I look at his intrusion into the Ukraine, and it makes sense to me. If you'd have told me, 10 years ago, hey, Putin's going to invade the Ukraine at some point, I can believe that. He's simply following the lines of his predecessors for the most part. It's Russia. Back in the 90s, in the early 90s, when our ivory towers all proclaimed the end of history, everything is peace from here on out. It was a new Russia. There's a new dynamic all across the world. I mean, what a joke it was then, and now we see what a joke it remains to be. Russia has always swung out at its neighbors. I believe that's going to be permanent. If he's not pounding on Ukraine, he's going to pound on somewhere. And how do we respond as the United States? My opinion is to mind matters, try and take a diplomatic lead, but never send U.S. troops over there, never make threats, military threats against Putin or Russia, and force the Europeans to step up for the first time in their history. When you talk to people, just the average people on the street, about NATO and so on, no one respects NATO. No one respects the EU. If you told me, hey, there's a NATO general fixing to walk in the room, my mind would instantly go to, Paper Tiger, Wokester, and so on. I think that's the way most people view it. I have sympathies, deep sympathies, for what has happened in the Ukraine. I think the world has let them down. I think someone should have stepped in and tried to create a diplomatic solution immediately, because you knew what the Russians were capable of. And I think the media has portrayed the Ukrainians as, hey, y'all can do this, y'all can beat off the Russians. Man, I don't see it like that at all.
I think I take a slightly different tack. When the Ukraine was first invaded, I tried to get pretty hard to get somebody to come on and represent the Russian perspective, and they wouldn't. And then not very long after that, all of a sudden YouTube started saying, we're going to kick Russia Today off of YouTube, so you can no longer hear what their propaganda is, although we've got PBS and NPR here, which is, state-run media. And then if you tried to get a speech by Putin, you could never watch the whole thing translated. They would only give you clips of it. And the more that I watched this, the more that I felt like I don't necessarily think he's a good guy, but I also think that the ability for me to discern what is going on there and why he's doing what he's doing and why the Russian people agree or disagree with what he's doing, that's all being shut off from the West, that's supposed to have the most open democracy, the most fluid conversations. And but I've spent quite a bit of time looking into different parts of the internet where I can get access to what the Russians are thinking. And this whole thing about Russia offering citizenship to the Ukrainians is because, according to them, in that region of the world, there were political gangs. And if you didn't get along with the politics of the day, if you viewed yourself more as Russian, you were endangered. Now, that may or may not be true, but the thing that strikes me is we're not allowed to have that conversation. The same way we weren't allowed to have the conversation about masks, the same way about vaccines, the same way that there's so many conversations we're not allowed to have, that I am so deeply suspicious of what's going on with the U.S.'s involvement with Russia that I think anybody trying to push us into the fray, anybody trying to funnel money there, should have to come and say, why don't you explain to me in detail what's going on in these border regions? Where are these cities located? How does this actually work? Because right now we're making decisions with a map that you might draw on a cake for a kid or something like that. It's like way too abstract and not real.
Yeah, you hit it, Vance. I mean, shoot. We're talking Ukraine. One of the most corrupt countries on the planet, and it always has been. You're going to send 40 billion of our, essentially 40 billion of our tax dollars. I mean, well, Lord, borrow the money from China, send it to Ukraine. You and I both know the money is going to end up in a spaghetti on the wall, going all kind of places.
All the same. I mean, like the U.S.
extremely distressing.
You know, this relates with agriculture. You know, people talk about like, oh, they're not going to be able to produce the wheat. That's going to have all these impacts on, you know, whether or not the people in the Middle East or Africa can eat. That's all true. But there's another big part of the Ukraine that we aren't talking about, and that is that Ukraine and Turkey are the biggest organic launderers in the world, meaning you can send non-organic food to these places, and then what comes out of their ports magically is now organic and can be sold all over the world. These are people that are playing in these international games. They're doing things with their ports. I'm not saying anyone deserves to be shot at or had civilians killed or refugees or anything. Just that there's so much confidence as I drive up and down the roads and I see Ukrainian flags and I see these, it makes me so uncomfortable that people are willing to say they support something that they genuinely don't understand.
Right, man. I mean, you say those flags, Vance. Every time I get on the internet, I see the yellow and the blue of the Ukraine flag attached to people's faces, and I'm thinking, y'all can't even find Ukraine on the map, neither can I. But you've got a flag there, and you don't know anything more than Russia bad, Ukraine good. And these same people, they never speak up against the CCP. I don't hear them speaking about the abuses in Saudi Arabia. I don't see them mentioning what's been happening in the last 40 years in the Congo. No, they just hop on the old Ukraine deal and let's shovel them money. Well, I'd ask them. I'd reasonably ask them. 40 billion? Why not 100 billion? If you genuinely believe they need 40 billion, let's send them more. Why stop at 40? And on we go from there. And as absurd as that question is, I have no doubt Cocaine Mitch McConnell, probably will float another 40 billion in a few months. You never know. Anyway, it just shows the absurdity of what's going on in this globe. It sounds nice to give money to people in need, but my Lord, there are people flooding across the southern border right now. You got Russia going across the Ukraine border. Everybody flips out. You got millions coming across our southern border that doesn't exist at the moment. The people in government don't seem to mind. So talk about absurd. The whole thing becomes just laughable, cryable. How's that?
Yeah, I mean, the closest that I can come up with like a reasonable explanation for what's going on is right now in the U.S., you almost cannot force any more money into the system outside of actually just dropping it into people's bank accounts the way that they did during COVID. I mean, you can't push any more liquidity into the banks. You know, there's no way to push more money in. So to me, I think the government, in order to keep the economy roaring at this hot rate, they have to do two things. They have to, one, make everybody afraid that it's going to be more expensive to borrow tomorrow, so you better borrow today, which is why that threat and that drumbeat about interest rates going up, that's people are talking about that all the time. Oh, interest rates, maybe they'll go more. Maybe they'll go a half a point. Maybe they'll even go 1 full point. So I got to make my purchases today because tomorrow it's going to be more expensive. And then at the same time, you've got to keep injecting money into that system so that people keep buying. And to me, that 40 billion into the Ukraine was just a very easy way to just keep money flowing into the system. But to me, this is like the mistakes you make towards the end of the game, not the ones you make at the beginning.
Lance, it's all become monopoly money. And, I can tell you straight up, for example, here in Mississippi, and I know in several surrounding states as well, you end up sending the same senators up to D.C. over and over and over. Uh, People that are in the system, people that are in their 60s and 70s, should have retired. They should have been on term limits. And we continue to send them up, and their behavior remains the same. They bring the pork home to individual states. In other words, they bring the pork home to Mississippi or Arkansas. And meanwhile, the country floats the opposite way. Right? We fund our states through D.C. while the country goes to hell in a handbasket, and our deficit reaches, levels, Hanna-Barbera levels that you make up from cartoons. So it's abysmal. It's something that the responsibility should be on you. It should be on me. It should be on our fellow citizens to start with our local politicians, our reps, our senators, put the pressure on them, call them, right? Lay into them. When you see a vote, hey, man, I'll tell you.
Do you call people and lay into them?
I call senators and reps that are not even in my state and lambaste them when they do things that are wrong. And I say this, I also make an effort to call when they do things that are right. But yes, I have no doubt that I'm probably on file with several senators and reps as a kook. That's fine. That's fine, because if we would all do that, I think we could take care of a little bit of this. And man, it's not hyperbole. All of this is going somewhere, right? The wheels grind, the sparks fly. We are heading somewhere as a country. There's nothing theoretical about it. If you feel untouched by what's going on, and you're in your little corner of the United States, your little corner of the world, and you think, hey, I don't want to be involved, I'm just going to continue as is, that's a terrible, apathetic attitude to take, because your kids and grandkids are going to be in the crosshairs. I've said it before, man. Pericles got it right, 2,000 years ago, when he said, we don't respect the man who minds his own business and doesn't want to be involved in politics. All right? You have a duty to be involved to some degree in politics to keep the country from going where it will.
So what are you excited about in the future? What do you look out and see that's worthy of optimism?
I have tremendous hope. I don't believe for a second that this country is lost. I have tremendous hope in our forefathers, the Constitution, and how it leads directly up to my own children. I know that if my children will do the very basics, the fundamentals, if they'll work their tails off and they'll simply act right, that there is tremendous opportunity in the job market, in living conditions, in all these wonderful states where we're at. I continue to believe that. Vance, I think John Adams got it right. I don't know what year it was, 1778, 1780. He said our Constitution is created for a holy, moral, and religious people. When you take those elements out and you hand someone the freedoms that were created by our forefathers, well, they weren't created by our forefathers, but they were enumerated, and we believe they're created by God. But when you take those freedoms and you hand it to an amoral society, you are headed for just absolute shambolic state. Whether it's a school shooter that just happened, right? Come on. There weren't these school shootings years ago. Not like this. So what has changed?
What do you think has changed?
I think the culture has changed. Everything flows downstream from culture. I think the permissive state that we live in, I think the shedding of personal responsibility, I think it's all coming to a head. There is no such thing as a moral vacuum. In other words, if you remove something or remove the fundamental pillars that we stand on, or you simply go into disbelief, there's no vacuum. Something is coming in. So we have this generation of young people. It's a lost generation. You know, I don't know, Vance. I look at the generation that comes out of the post World War I era, when society was flipped on its head and you had that massive loss of life, massive loss of faith. Maybe there's a parallel now with what we see with the young people today. But
you know, it's interesting. So I got that question about what are you excited about? Because my executive producer, Ben Anderson, he was in college and then he dropped out. He was like, he looked at the equation. He said, the amount of money this is going to cost me to get all the way through, I could do this some other way. He was making money in another way. And so he's dropped out. But he does the reading of somebody that is in college. He's reading scientific papers. He's like constantly making contact with people that are doing research. And so he is kind of living in two worlds where he is the education of a college kid, but he didn't go to school with them. But when he hangs out with kids that are his age, one of the questions he asks them, and then he brings it back and he tells me all about it, and we have a good discussion, is, what are you excited about? What are you optimistic about? And he says, all of them. Everyone that he's asked this question to, and I wouldn't put it past him to have done 50 of these questions, is they're not excited about anything, right? They don't see a potential for themselves. You know, he said one person got really excited. He was like, oh, I think there might be more unionization in the future, right? Like that was like the big hope for the future. And you think about that and you think like, I think that the way that different generations in the past have been able to be successful was that, and this is a dark way to look at it, but World War I, when they came back, there were so many people dead. There were so many new technologies that had been created. So many people had died from disease that you could start to rebuild and have a new way of doing it. Same thing after World War II, right? You get to rebuild after these things. And maybe one of the very high costs of peace and prosperity is that the growth becomes so thick underneath that the new branches, the new trees, the new things can't come in. And certainly those people that are the old growth doesn't want to give up what they have. And so I wonder if nothing changes until a fire happens.
yeah, you are on it, Vance. We are now a fat people, right? I don't mean that in a literal sense, but we are a fat people. We need to get lean. You know, with our kids, there's a reason that you raise your child with a sweetness and yet a fear nature as well, respect. That's gone.
In what way did you do that with your kids? How were you both sweet but also prepared them for nature's reality?
Old school, I whipped their rear ends, and I think they needed it. I believe I needed it when I was a kid. And you go from there. My kids, for example, Vance, they could say a lot of things. I'm going to roll with it. The one thing, we're going to draw lines. You're not going to disrespect your mother, for example. You talk to me in a certain way and we'll go at it. You're not going to disrespect mama. You're not going to disrespect other adults. And you start from there. And then you take the grades, right? I don't care what you make. What you're going to give me, I'm going to demand 100%. If my son or my daughter gives me 100% and comes out with a 70, a 60, I'll be the proudest daddy on the planet. That's fine, because you give me your best. But if you make a 90, Vance, and you should have made a 97, I'm going to be on you like a bulldog, because you're crafting, shaping the child. I think it's the basics. I think anybody listening to this knows what I'm talking about. Just raise them with the simple basics. And when you find your child has lied at school, when you find your child has done wrong, right, come down on them. Make sure that the fear they have is not what takes place at school. Maybe they get paddled It's when they come home, they're going to get it much worse. Because you've only got them in the house for a tiny amount of time, and then they're gone. The discipline's over with. So, man, I don't know anything, Vance, except I was put on this planet to raise a little girl and a little boy. Those are the things I can tell you for sure. Everything else is big question marks for me. Those two things I know for a fact.
I feel that. I mean, and just like once you've gotten that responsibility handed to you, the fact that flower only blooms for a little while as a child. It'll grow into something else, hopefully, if you make it all the way through. But man, it's they only have so much time where they can't walk, and then all of a sudden they can walk, but they can't talk, and then all of a sudden they get one word and then two words, and things start accelerating from there. And it's just a flower that only blooms the one time, and so you've got to do it right because you're sending them out into a wild world.
Wild world. When they come home with problems from a teacher, or they come home with problems with somebody in society, say, hey, kid, you're on your own. Unless it's a gross violation, but you're on your own. And the reason you're on your own is because you are going to be dealing with that for the rest of your life. Welcome to life. So you can't coddle, right? You can't just allow them excuses. Just say, hey, no tears, because you got to deal with it. And believe me, Vance, if there's anybody in this world that has made mistakes as a parent, it's me. But, however, I hope we're all like this, is you take the mistake and you move on, you don't repeat it. But I'm
What you been reading lately?
I'm reading right this second, fantastic book on the post-assassination of Lincoln and the 10, 11 days that Booth was on the road. In other words, when Booth leaves the theater, from the time he leaves up to his death, it's a book covering that flight and the cast of characters that was around him. Shame on me, I can't remember the name of the book, can't even remember the author's name, but it reads like fiction, gets your blood going. And it's a story it's often overlooked, all the machinations, all the cast of people that were on stage figuratively with Booth. Absolute incredible story, man. Incredible.
I mean, I didn't even know that he went on the run for 11 days. This is news to me.
Vance, yeah, it's one of the wildest tales. He managed to get across the bridge and out of D.C. before the word broke. So in other words, right when he shot Lincoln with that, I can't remember the exact caliber of that pistol, but when he put that ball into Lincoln's head, in the back of his head, and jumped down the stage, of course he had a horse waiting there for him. He took the horse, right, it was all pre-planned. He bolted out of D.C. and he got out, because we're talking right at the war was over, but you had soldiers all around D.C. So he manages to get through the picket, so to speak, and he's on the road. So it's 1865, and there's no way to track a person. So he's traveling in front of the news. Of course, his leg was shattered, right? And so it held him back. But he's trying to stay in front. I don't know if he was planning on heading down to Mexico. If he was planning on taking refuge in the deep south. But they could not catch the guy. And you talk about fascinating. They should just do a movie. You got to realize Booth was a very, 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 very well-known actor in the United States. Right?
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I always thought he was just some kind of ramshackle guy.
Yeah, it would be like, in a way, just imagine if Brad Pitt goes and assassinates Trump or Biden, something like that, and then takes off. So, Booth was an extremely intelligent individual. There were more people in D.C. that him and his cadre tried to assassinate that night. So they went after Secretary of State Seward, and I can't remember if they went after Andrew Johnson. There was 2 or 3 of them they tried to kill that night. They were only able to kill Lincoln. Seward, they put a knife to, and he should have died, but he didn't. It was major league.
You're always finding really powerful books, and you sent me a couple books on shipping, which I thought was just amazing. And really, there was 1600s. And I don't know if we've talked about this on the podcast before or not, but what I've been struck by was the Dutch East India Company, the trading company, was largely a religious cabal. and that they were using their Presbyterian, their I don't know if Presbyterian, but their religious Protestant religion to be able to control sailors, to be able to control shipping rates, to be able to control how things went around the country. And I think, man, once you control the shipping lines, you become extremely powerful. And you mix that with the power to, control salvation for people, is almost unlimited power.
They were gods on the ship, Vance. Once you realize the power, not just of that entire system that you described, but the actual statutes by which they control what goes on those ships, life and death power, it gets really chilling to imagine yourself on one of those, across the world trips back in the day. I love more like wild stories. And I've got one I stumbled over, Vance, that I've finished writing. Lord willing, it'll come out next month or the month after. It's on a guy who, back in the 1950s, he's still alive. Back in the 1950s, when he was a teenager, came up with a scheme by which he was going to harvest. And when I say harvest, that's what I mean. He was going to harvest snake venom, right? Venom was going for a high dollar amount. And he determined that he would get enough venom to make himself rich, at least in the temporary. And so he went out 15, 14 years old, can't remember the exact age he was, and he began to harvest milk, right? He would catch and milk cottonmouths in sloughs and then sneak home. He did it all unbeknownst to his parents. And by the end of his summer of collection, he had an entire jar, he had a mason jar filled with dried venom. Think in the terms of rock candy, because he would bring the venom home and pour it out on a flat piece of glass. And once he had it poured out, it would take on a somewhat yellow sheen when it hardened. I think it took like 7 days to harden. Then he'd take a razor blade and he would scrape that residue into his mason jar. So he thought it was pure, right? He believed it was pure. It was not, but he didn't know that as a kid. By the end of the summer, he had this whole jar filled. We're talking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cottonmouths that he caught alone by hand. And these cottonmouths were not, let's say, juveniles a foot long. These
Cottonmouths are aggressive.
Yeah.
This is not like ordinary snakes. These are the ones that are like, oh, are you in my area? Now I'm going to chase you.
Right, a cottonmouth, Vance, will hold its ground. It doesn't have the fear that a lot of other snakes do. It'll coil up, hold its ground, pop that mouth open. There's actually a really scary noise that they make when they coil and they snap that head back and flick that mouth open. You can see that white. A lot of the time they'll pop that mouth at you, and you can hear it. It's very audible. So he managed with a noose and a hook he took off a clothesline to catch these 3 and 4 and 5 footers, milk them, get back home. Anyway, absolutely fascinating, true story. I think they ought to make a movie about him someday. Anyway, just a
well, what
example
happened
of
with
craziness.
the purity? I mean, you're killing me. We just got to wait till the story comes out.
No, I don't mind telling you because it's so ludicrous. He called I forget the name of the place in Florida. He said, "Hey, I've got venom I want to sell y'all. It's pure. You're going to want this." I caught the snakes myself. They gave me a spiel. And the scientist on the other end of the line, he was actually speaking to someone in the lab, said, "Son, are you sure you've got pure venom?" He said, "Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I've got it right here." Well, the guy explained to him that if you want to have pure venom, it has to run through all sorts of machinery, all sorts of purification devices, and be overseen by people as it happens. So in other words, he put his life on the line for an entire summer, and he came up with an O for nada. And in fact, I think I've messed up the story, Vance, because I don't believe I ever asked him what happened to the mason jar filled with venom. Maybe I should go back and do that. And I tell you something, it was really scary because he had a buddy that introduced him to doing that and showed him how. And his buddy actually got snake bit in a sense because when they dried the venom out and they took the razor blade to run across that flat piece of glass, which again, just could kind of envision as rock candy. One of the slivers from that residue poked into the end of his thumb, right? And as soon as it got in his thumb, it melted. And of course, he was essentially snake bit and had to go to the hospital to get treated for cottonmouth bite and all that. And I couldn't help but laugh because it was too ludicrous not to at least have a few chuckles.
So, man, I was so enthralled with that, I didn't even have a question loaded up for you. I know I've been pushing you to read this book called The Mandibles, and I like it's all about a really wealthy family that it's fiction, and it was written by the woman that wrote the book. We Need to Talk About Kevin, which is a story about a deranged kid and what role his mother had when in making him deranged. She didn't really want him. She kind of wanted to have this YOLO life, and he could kind of pick up on that. That's what that story's about. Well, Lionel Shriver is the name of the author, and she wrote this book called The Mandibles. And in it, this wealthy family is going through the experience of inflation and going through the stages of like, oh, it's temporary. Oh, this will go away. Oh, this is getting bad, but let's make these decisions. And you see how people delude themselves. And she wrote this in 2016, and it is shocking just how right she's gotten it so far. That we read it for the book club for the Articulate Ventures Network, and I would say everybody in that read it at least had the experience of being like, yeah, okay, that's a little bit more real for me now. It's probably why I'm so hyped up right now about inflation. Well, that, and I'm reading a book called The Death of Money, which we could talk about.
Vance, that book, The Mandibles, still sits on my bedside table. And I started it. My problem is you're dealing with a low intellect person that cannot ingest fiction too well. I have IQ issues. And every time nonfiction comes along, I just leap onto that nonfiction. But let me ask you something about The Mandibles. Do you think they're going to turn that, particularly in this age we're living in right now? Is that going to be a movie?
Well, it's funny you would ask that because I listened to the book originally, and I was like, this is so precise and so incisive, so just like poking of certain like academic classes and some people that are kind of untouchable right now, that I bought the hardcover book and had it mailed to my house because I was like, I think there's a reasonable chance this book will get banned. If not banned, pushed out, because this is talking about a reality that most people don't want to face. And I think there's entirely possible that it could become a book that is not welcome in this country.
Wow. Good night. Vance, before I forget, off on crazy stories, and stop me if I've already told you this, I may have mentioned it just in conversation. Sometimes I go after these tales and you latch on, you get lucky, you just happen to knock on someone's door at the right time. Last year, was the year before, I came across a story. I found it I was looking over some court documents, and I found a bizarre tale. There was a farmer, I think up in a northern state, I'll put it that way. And he was I think he was spraying corn, something like that. Blue sky, tracks and tracks of flat ground. He could see well into the distance. And he saw against the blue sky line, he could see what appeared to be some kind of white disturbance. And he took it for a broken irrigation line that might be spitting up spray. And I called the gentleman. I got hold of him and I asked him, could you please tell me the story on record for print? And he didn't want to. But here's what happened. And your listeners may be absolutely fascinated by this. He moved the half a mile, a quarter mile across that field on his spraying vehicle toward what he thought was the spray of irrigation line. And when he got up on it, when he got closer, he could see that it was smoke. It was smoke billowing. And it wasn't coming from the field. It was green corn in the field. It was billowing from a ditch. It was a ditch of high grass. He gets down off the vehicle, makes his way to that ditch. And you can just imagine him sticking his hands in, parting the grass. And he parts the grass, he gets right down to the smoke source. And when he makes his final push into those strands of grass, he sees, in a brief instant, what he assumes is the flesh of a pig. Long, white. And he recoils back, it's on fire, and he realizes that's not the flesh of a pig, that's a human being.
Oh!
And what he was looking at was a woman's body. She was 100% naked. She's in the ditch, in the grass. She's on fire. It's very much dead. He goes back to his sprayer immediately. Goes back to his sprayer, dials for the sheriff. Says, hey, here's what I'm looking at. Here's what I found. Y'all need to get over here as quick as you can. While he's talking to the sheriff, a pickup truck comes off of the gravel road onto the turn road and pulls up beside him. It's one of his workers. The worker gets out and says, hey, man, what are you doing and where's that smoke coming from? And he starts to move toward that smoke. And the farmer says, look, don't go over there. Don't get near it. I'm not even going to tell you what it is, but you're going to mess things up. You need to get in your vehicle. Sheriff's on his way. You need to get on. Get to stepping. And he says, oh, you know, what's wrong? And he attempts to talk to the farmer. The farmer is actually standing on the spray vehicle. He gets in his truck, the worker does, and he drives away. And as he drives away, the sheriff and them pull up 2 or 3 vehicles. The guy in the pickup truck actually forces the sheriff, he's going slow, not going fast, over to the side of the gravel road, and he leaves. Anyhow, they investigate. They figure out what's going on. The woman was beaten to death a mile away in a trailer, beaten to death, blood all over the place. And the guy who killed her was the guy who pulled up in the pickup truck, right? So I said to the farmer, I said, could I please tell this tale? People are going to want to know. And he told me, he was nice, but he said, no, sir, no way. And the reason you can't tell this tale is because nobody's going to want to know it. And if you disagree with me, tell me why they would want to know. I said, man, I assure you. I said, farmers get everything under the sun dumped on their farmland. Maybe it's a vehicle. Maybe it's deer guts. Maybe it's just a truckload of trash. Maybe it's a naked crackhead. Maybe it could be any of those kind of things. I said, but if you tell them there was a woman's burning body in a ditch on your, just off your corn, everybody and their mother is going to want to read this. I said, and here's the big and. I said, it's my opinion, after listening to you and reading the court documents, that guy who pulled up in that truck was fixing to kill you. And he said, I don't. I said, that's what I believe. So I'm waiting, Vance. I'm hoping that the gentleman might change his mind. But you get fortune on some stories, and some slip, man, they slip right through your hands. And you can tell from me telling that, Lord, that story tells itself.
It's interesting that you have a sense of asking him whether or not he wants the story told. I don't get the sense that most journalists care whether or not the teller of the story wants it told.
Yeah, you know, Vance, you can't mess in your own nest, right? You are nothing except your reputation. You, for example, before I knew you, I knew of your reputation. And one of the reasons I looked forward so to speaking with you was your reputation. I believe that's the same for me. I believe it's the same for everybody. You are nothing at the end of the day except your reputation. If you take the effort, make the effort to do the small things, simply keep your word, you'll go a long way. And for any young person out there who says, just keeping my word will differentiate me from my colleagues, regardless of what industry or field I work in, I tell them absolutely, because the sad thing is that so few people do that. If you just keep your word, that'll go a long way by itself.
Yeah, I actually got to sit in on a retreat. I was running a retreat for one of my clients that wanted to help their sales team just bond and get better at it. And they brought in a guy that was a client that did deals with this business. And he said something that I think is really forgotten. He's like, if I have a client and they're paying me and we're working on a project, I contact them at least once a week. And I contact everybody that is working on that deal or around this, every single one of them. And he's like, now that contact may be as small as a 1-sentence email, but he's like, those 1-sentence emails saying, hey, how's everything working? Just checking in. He's like, it makes everybody feel so much better. And I got to tell you, like, it's funny. I'm 40 years old. I feel like I've done fairly well professionally, but that's something that I needed to have spoken into my ear, because sometimes I'm like, I don't have any news to report. They're probably going to be annoyed that I'm checking in and I don't really have anything to say. Well, I just started doing it since I heard this guy give this speech, and it's just like things start blossoming. And so I think that some of the smallest, seemingly insignificant tasks that people know they need to do, hold on to your word, check in with people, makes such a big difference. And you just got to communicate that to young people, because it's not natural, even for somebody like me.
Vance, it's such a big amen from me to what you said. Think of the effort that it takes. Think of the effort that it takes simply to text someone, hey, hope you're doing well, hope your family's all right, just wanted to say hey, something like that. I can tell you right now, I enjoy getting those texts from somebody, and I can assure you the people that you work with, again, whatever industry you're in, they're going to feel the same way. That is some really, really low-hanging fruit, and it costs almost nothing.
Well, yeah, and you're a writer. You probably experienced this too. Like, I had a lovely woman named Molly write me, and she said, hey, you were talking about educating your daughter and some of the school options around here. I have a daughter same age. I'd love to get together and talk. Man, normally clients pay me to go sit down and have meetings with them. But if somebody calls and says, I noticed your work, I heard what you were doing, I'm interested in it, and I want to talk, like, I'm the first one to want to sit down and do that. And we had a fantastic conversation, and now we'll be friends. Like, I'm sure we will stay in contact. Our families will get together. I want her to meet my family. And, but you think, like, all it took was somebody having the gusto to write somebody that they didn't know, that they hear on the podcast or that they see doing writing, and how much of your life can change. And it really is just like, just having the gusto to do it.
Right. Vance, I don't have much in this world, but when I go see a farmer or I interview a farmer, man, I don't want to just be a taker. Hey, can you tell me this? Can you allow me on your land? Can I take a picture of you? That's the easiest thing in life is to be a taker. So now, I'm making an effort. The one thing I have tons of around me is petrified wood. And so I keep a ton of petrified wood with me. And if a guy wants some, right, because it's very difficult to get for some people, then I take them pieces, big, small, what have you, as much as they want. It's a simple token of appreciation. If someone listening, they may say, well, that's nothing. But again, it's so easy to be a taker. Take somebody some donuts. Take them some petrified wood. Treat them like you want to be treated. I've said it 1,000 times, Vance. I know I've said it to you before, but if you want to judge someone's character, find out, right? Not how they treat their family. Don't take how they treat their coworkers. Don't judge them by how they treat people that influence them or anything of that sort. Find out how they treat people who mean nothing to them. In other words, if I could secretly watch someone, how they interact with the guy cleaning the commode at Taco Bell, that tells me what sort of person they probably are. I can watch them, how they interact with the greeter at Walmart. That tells me something about their character. Because if you tell me, hey, I treat my wife really good, I treat my daughter or my son really good, that means nothing to me. You should. That's a given. I don't give you credit because you treat your friends or your coworkers or your boss well. I understand the motivation, but if I see you treat people who mean nothing to you well, that tells me something.
You know, I have a perfect example of that. There's a guy in the ag world, a lot of people know who he is, a guy named Kevin Folta. So he does a bunch of work where he teaches about GMOs and how to have conflict conversations. And he has gotten himself in all sorts of hot water, problems with his university, not liking what he's doing, conflict with other activists. And so I think people oftentimes have this kind of impression of him, of the chaos around him. But I have, on a couple of occasions, encountered somebody that needed help, a guy with a disability that really wants to do podcasting. I helped him as much as I could. And you hand him over to somebody like, I actually contacted quite a few people, and most of them just ignored it. They just didn't get back to me about this. But Kevin jumped in, helps him, tries to figure this out, makes phone calls on his behalf. And you think like, man, no matter what is going on in Kevin's world, every time I've ever asked him to help people, these people have no ability to help him whatsoever. He's the kind of guy that does it. And so for me, it just makes me say, for all the quirkiness of Kevin, I absolutely love that guy because he treats people as well as he can in every situation.
Big 10-4. That's funny you bring that name up. I think it may have been last year, the year before. Kevin Folta does not have a clue who I am. I got his email blind. I emailed him regarding a specialist of some sort that I was trying to contact. He answered back, I'd say within an hour or two via email. He helped me with cheer, and I was able to get the person that I was trying to get a hold of. So that matches up precisely with the way you just described him.
Yeah, and I mean, the number of people that I reached out to that to try and get his help, like, I don't hold anything against them. People got busy lives, whatever. But you just see, like, there's something to that, right? I really do think that concept of who do you help that can't help you is a very good mark of really who somebody really is.
Absolutely. I tell you what, Vance, we are all, in my opinion, we all belong at the bottom of the totem pole. And, when you get right down to it. So I always remember that. I'm satisfied with the bottom of the totem pole because I don't need to be any higher. Got enough problems in life. I always think I'm somebody. If you let your ego go, you'll go. So I belong in the ditch. I belong at the bottom. And the older you get, at least to me, I'm 50 years old. The older I get, the less judgmental I get toward others. However, it's a flip there. The closer I stick to the fundamental truths, right? And yet I judge others less. So it's not as if I'm saying, hey, I judge less, live and let live. No, I cling tighter to the moral truths of the Bible, of our Constitution, and yet I have far more mercy towards someone than my arrogant self would have ever had at age 30. Maybe that's a poor reflection on me, but it's an honest reflection.
Do you go to church?
Yes, sir.
Tell me about the experience of making time to go to church week in and week out.
Vance, my daddy raised me to have no golden calves. He put the name of Jesus up there, and that was the only one. He never demanded or asked, hey, you need to go to this church, you need to do this, you need to do that. So in my 30s, I had 2 little kids, and if the doors opened at church, we were there. Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, doors open any other time, we were there. I put church attendance as an idol. I patted myself on the back because we went to church so much. And the older I got, the more I realized, hey, you're an arrogant son of a gun. You actually think you're something for all the wrong reasons. You look at a Pharisee, Sadducee, and that was me. And so now I think I've taken a far more reasonable approach, which is you can only do so much, and your priority is your kids and your wife. I would have stomped my foot and said, hey, we got to go to church at this time, this day. Not anymore. I'm not giving advice to anybody out there. I'm just saying that's what happened in my life.
Was there a moment that you encountered that made you have this kind of realization?
Yes, absolutely, Vance. Well, I might say there was multiple moments, but dealing with different strife in my life made me realize that I was far weaker and I needed mercy from those around me. And I wish I'd have come to those kind of thoughts when I was in my 20s, but I didn't. I always matured late, and I suppose I just never reached that stage until I was 40 years old. I guess, we all have our ego issues, and the older you get to recognize my shortcomings. And so the older I got, I could see the shortcomings stacking up. You can either deny them or you can deal with them. And so I dealt with them in my 40s, and I stumble every day now, but at least I'm able to put those things out there and deal with them.
I really resonate with what you're saying. Like, I definitely had the experience in my 20s of being like, I know the right way, I know the path, I know what's good. And it wasn't until exactly you get into your 30s and you hit some moment when you're like, and it's actually, for me, I can think of multiple moments where you're like, I actually am going to have to go and ask for forgiveness from this person and from that person. And like, you do start to wake up, one, to judging other people way less harshly, because it's so easy to be like, well, I'm good at this and I don't have problems, and so therefore they shouldn't either, and I'm going to judge them really harshly. And then you have a couple of those circumstances where you're like, wow. And I liken it to when you if you're caring for somebody that gets sick and you're a little bit like rolling your eyes like, yeah, I guess I'll go get you that food, or I guess I'll go get you that medicine, but then you get sick and you feel either what it's like to have somebody care for you and you think, hey, I want to deliver that to somebody else, or you have the even more painful experience of not having anybody to care for you and being like, wait a second, what's going on in my world that when I got sick, nobody was here for me? That's probably not them. It probably says something about me. And I think that happens in all of our lives. It's just really, I wish I'm exactly like you. If I would have learned that earlier in my life probably would have been a lot easier.
Hey, yeah, I mean, I'm just blessed with my wife. She knows I'm insane and has put up with me all these years. So for all of you who ain't married out there, for y'all who looking for a wife, find one that can tolerate insanity and everything will be fine.
What's your particular brand of insanity as a husband and a father?
Man, I'm a square peg in a round hole, or is it a round peg in a square hole, what have you. And never been a fit anywhere, Vance. Never quite been a fit in any place. My interests are too diverse for reason. And, I want to listen to Bach as soon as Duck Dynasty ends. I want to eat. I want to eat. I want to go outside and pee off the porch, and then come inside and eat a fine dinner. That's not a good thing, and it's a good thing at the same time. So I'm probably a little bit more honest than most people, but that's probably just age. There's not a question, Vance, anymore that I won't answer. Again, with tolerance for others, but I don't throw my opinion on. I don't just go around telling people the way it is. But if you come to me and ask, what's your opinion on this particular topic, I'll be glad to give you a fastball. But there's a difference in throwing the ball at someone and throwing it after they ask you to. That's the difference. right? So whether it's about, you name the topic, if it's homosexuality or race or whatever it is, I'm not going to go around and beat people over the head. I'll mind my business, right? Just don't blame me if you ask. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, I learned from a good mentor of mine, like that there's advice that people want that they couldn't ask for, but you really have to have a deep relationship with a person before you can give them advice that they didn't ask for. And the example I give is that he called me up one day after we'd been hanging out drinking martinis the night before. And this guy's like, at the time he was 90 years old. Now he's 100. He calls me up and he says, Vance, I've been looking over my notes from last night. And I'm like, man, it was like 12 hours ago we were together. And he goes, yeah, okay. Well, first thing, you can't show up to my apartment dressed the way that you were. Do you even own a suit? And I was like, no. He's like, all right, well, bring your checkbook and we're going to go buy a suit. So I was like, all right, now I'm getting to, he wasn't going to buy one for me. He's going to tell me to buy it. And then he asked me some question about like, I had mentioned something about the UN and he wanted me to send him my sources. So he was actually paying attention to what I talked about. And then the third thing, and it was like, oh man, this one hurt. He goes, Vance, this is the third thing is, Vance, have you been putting on weight? And I was like, maybe a little bit. And he goes, yeah, we got to get that under control. It doesn't really matter what diet you choose. You just need to choose one. So I'm going to send you a book and I want you to read it. You either choose that diet or choose a different one, but you got to lose some weight. And I was like, holy geez. I like, but, I look back on that point in my life and I say, no one else had told me those things, and if it didn't have somebody looking after me that cared about me, that was saying like, you're not going to feel good about me while I'm telling you this advice. He had to have known that. But afterwards, I felt so much gratitude towards him, because I had been looking in the mirror being like, you putting on weight? Nah, you can get away with it. Nah. So I mean, that's just kind of a turn on what you're saying. But like, the world, if you don't have somebody that'll step in and tell you things that you don't want to hear, you can be lost and blind out there. I certainly was.
Yeah, Vance, I always say, you, me, we need to be offended every day. You need to get offended every day because it keeps you in check. I don't necessarily enjoy being offended, but you need it, especially in this country. Absolutely.
I like that idea that you should be offended. I told you I was talking with that woman, Molly, and she was a rare person because she was telling me about the podcast she listens to that she literally doesn't agree with. But she's like, then I get a much better perspective. And when I've got my ideas about other things, and, sometimes people say that, I listen to Fox or, I listen to CNN. She was not messing around. She really did listen to things she didn't agree with. And I think that that's one of the biggest problems. I know I find myself falling into the vacuum of just wanting to hear people that are going to say things I already think just in a different way. And it's hard to go listen to stuff you don't agree with.
Right. I mean, I'm a Monty Python fan, and Life of Brian is extremely sacrilegious. However, right, it goes against all of my sensibilities. I'm not blind. I'm not deaf. It's very, very funny. It's extremely funny. So, you have to take things with a grain of salt. I'm not going to hand you the DVD, Vance, and say, hey, you need to go watch Life of Brian. I'm not going to do that, right? But the point is, you got to be realistic. Okay, I admit it's extremely funny, right? You got to live, man. You got to live. So,
what was the last thing you were offended by?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm certainly offended by the encroachment of our government, right? Everything that's happening in this country, government-wise, offends me as an American. But that relates to the Constitution, and so I want America to get back on track. As far as personal offense, man, I don't know, Vance. Unless someone would insult my wife on the street or insult Mama, it'd probably be water off a duck's back.
So I have been offended lately. It was earlier today. There was an email that went out in my little neighborhood. Now my neighborhood is like a suburban neighborhood, which we're private, but like really all that means is that we pay for our own garbage collection and we have to repair our own roads, right? Like, but the libertarian in me loves this because I like the freedom of it. Well, so there was this email that went around that somebody had their house broken into. I didn't really look into it very closely. And they said, oh, it's just a few blocks away. I imagine it's probably a few miles away, but people get really worked up. And so then they start sending this email around about it's now finally time for us to put cameras and a gate up in our neighborhood. And I was like so instantly angry about this, like really offended, because I'm like, I don't want to have to punch in a code. I don't really want to live in a place where it's private to the degree that, we have a gate around here. I really don't want to have a video camera of somebody taking my license plate every time I come and go. Like, this is not for me. And then I came upstairs and I was, ranting and raving to my wife. And she said something that was really powerful, like that I hadn't really thought of. She said, well, they're scared and you're not. And it really hadn't dawned on me that they weren't doing this just because they wanted to have a gate or just because they wanted more security, but that they were actually scared. And as soon as she says that, I realized like a lot of these people are a lot older. They're in their 60s or all the way up to their 80s. They view an intruder as like an actual real threat, and maybe it is a real threat, but it doesn't feel like one dangerous to me. So it was very good for me to both be offended, but then also have some level of empathy for them. Because if somebody's afraid, they really will do things to try and mitigate that fear.
Heck yeah, man. We get on to guns or something like that for a topic, I'm telling you.
What do you think about the gun debate? That is just raged up now, right? Anytime you have a school shooting, people say we could stop this if we were limiting guns. What are your thoughts on the gun situation in the United States?
I think the people in Congress, Vance, all of them, almost all of them, first of all, I don't think they realize the gun situation on the ground. If you take most people out there, at least the people that live in rural areas, but I know in the city also, a lot of the time it's not just that you own a gun. Do you own a gun? Yes, no. Most people, most average Americans running around, we're going on 50 guns, 30 guns. I don't know, a lot of guns. I'm going to guess a lot of your listeners, I'm going to guess most people in my family have 30, 40, 70, 100, something like that. So you start off with the folks in Congress that have an almost, it seems like, a zero level of knowledge about firearms. So my basic opinion is if you outlaw firearms, and I don't mean a complete outlaw, but if the more strictures you put on firearms, the more simply your outlaws will be carrying guns. I have no solution because I don't believe there's a solution. If you want to raise the age of gun access from 18 to 21 or to 25, I don't think it'll make any difference. If you want to arm teachers in the school, do I really think that'll make a difference? Probably not. I think these things are going to happen. They're going to continue to happen. They come in spates. As far as, the ARs and what type of rifles you have, if they were to literally do a Beto O'Rourke and come in and take the ARs or outlaw them, what have you, it would simply morph into a different kind of gun. So I'm a big Second Amendment guy. I have no problem with Second Amendment. I think gun owners are actually decent people. Seems like all these shooters to me are already bad people or crazy or simply outlaws. And meanwhile, you see the statistics, the same ones I do. No one seems to care about all the other people shot one at a time or two at a time in Chicago or Detroit or wherever. The school shootings get all of the attention. And my Lord, if it was one of my kids killed in such a thing, certainly I would want attention there too. But the bottom line is it's America. It's a little bit, we come from a Wild West heritage, and there's no getting it back. And another thing about the Second Amendment is, historically speaking, tomorrow is not today. The government knows. They know if they were to make a move on their citizenry, the citizenry is armed. And I think that's a wonderful thing. And if you want to go back and say, well, back in 1776, they were armed with smoothbores, for example. And therefore, that's the sort of firearm you should be allowed today. Hey, smoothbore in 1776 was pretty top of the line. That was a fine gun. In other words, they had the best they could get hold of. And that's what we as Americans still want today. So I'm very, very pessimistic on the whole gun control deal. I don't see any ways to improve it. Yes, you can tweak all kind of things. I go to gun shows, been to gun shows, and I think that's part of liberty. Again, you've reached a point where you've got a moral vacuum out there with these kooks running around doing the shooting. I don't think there's any solution, Vance. I don't.
One of the things that I've noticed recently is the news will be interviewing a congressperson, right?
Mm-hmm.
The latest one I saw was Elizabeth Warren, but I'm neither here nor there. Just like they'll find a congressperson that is storming around, and then they'll say, "Wait, what's wrong, Congresswoman? What, or Senator? What do you think of this?" And they'll be like, "Oh, I'm mad. I'm so mad I can barely talk." Mm. And they talk about how mad they are, right? Mm. As though that is permission to make a change or to do something. And I know people need a motivation. So emotion is a strong way to motivate people. But it's actually in order for us to make informed, solid, really clear decisions, you don't want to do that when people are emotional. So, whether that's the people coming out and saying, don't tell me about XYZ because of either the Constitution or the dead children or the whatever, they are at the height of their emotionality. And in fact, not only are you at the height of emotionality, you're at the height of receiving social benefit from having an opinion that synchronizes with others, right? Very, very few people go out and put opinions out there that they think no one will agree with. You're putting it on social media so and sometimes people are putting it out there to be argumentative, but because you believe this is going to confer some sort of benefit from you in your social circles, and on top of that, you're demonstrating the most emotion possible. It seems like this is a recipe for horrible decision making.
I agree, Vance. We talk about bump stocks, talk about universal background checks and tweaking this and instituting this extra regulation and so on. I think they know that all of those things are meaningless, but they put that out there as a form of posturing, political posturing. Look what we've done, even though they know in the end it's not going to have a big time effect. Look, if someone if they want to go into elementary school with a deer rifle or a pistol or an AR or what have you, and they want to kill kids if they're that evil, I don't believe there's any way to prevent them from doing so. They don't even have to go in, Vance. They could simply get in the perimeter and shoot kids on a playground. I remember that happened basically in Jonesboro years ago. There were the kids up there. I believe they had deer rifles, and they managed to get the alarm to go off in the school. And I think when the kids came bustling out those doors, they opened up and killed a number of children. Again, my point is if you have that level of insanity out there with people, I don't think you can prevent it. Lord help us when you do catch these people prior to those events. There's no excuse not to lock them up. But again, I don't see you stopping it. I don't.
So one of the things that I saw in the news recently, and there's a big argument about this, is that the school shootings are associated with people taking antidepressants. And if you go and look at the amount of people taking antidepressants and you correlate that with the number of school shootings, then it seems like that there's a tight connection between them. And then there's other people that come out and say, no, these facts are not correlated. But to me, like going all the way back to the beginning of our discussion, when we were starting to talk about things like SSRIs or ADD medication, I think that we really should look at how much are we changing the brain chemistry of our fellow humans, and what consequence does that have? And I really mean, like, if everything's on the table, if we're saying, hey, we really want to solve this problem, we should put everything on the table. We should say, hey, has something changed in our water? Has something changed in the drugs that we're taking? Like, we should really open it up and look at it, because it's not going to be acceptable for us to say, well, look at the decline in church populations and then look at the rise in school shootings, because one, it's just, what are you going to do? You're going to make people go to church? I don't think that's going to happen. And two, there's going to be some correlations that don't have any meaning at all. And maybe these drugs don't have meaning, but to me, I'm deeply, I don't know how to say it any more than I am. Like, I am deeply suspicious of these drugs and their role in how much our society is changing.
That's right, Vance. I mean, what was mama on while the child was in the womb? What's the child been on since they were, Lord knows what age? All on the table. Not even talking about, under the table drugs or illegal drugs. Just what were they on prescription-wise? Prescription USA. Your neighbor, right? Your neighbor is on Xanax. Just make the assumption. There's a whole host of drugs that everyone is on. So there's.
And in addition to the drugs, the other one that really strikes me is that the United States leads the world in number of people incarcerated, and so those are all fathers out of the home. These are, and this is a complicated question, because it's saying, do you hit some certain tipping point where you lock up so many people that you create a culture where they're just going to be locked up in, and something has gone horribly wrong in a society where the richest, most powerful nation in the world is also the same one locking the most people up.
Yeah, I think, we're headed to hell regarding that, and the illegitimate birth rate. I think you start right there, and you look at segments of society. When you look at black society, Hispanic society, white society, and you look at those fatherless birth rates, and some parts of the Mississippi Delta, right, that'll be 80% plus for blacks. And you look at Mexicans nationwide, what is it, 30, 35? Whites not too far behind that. So all racial groups seem to have an increasing rate. And you just ask yourself, what's the result of that? Once you extrapolate and you raise generation after generation without the nuclear family, what happens? I promise you this, it's a bad thing in the end, and it just fosters more government care. It fosters a sense of, again, grievance, and who are you going to blame? So the politicians very rarely address that. Obama was in there for 8 years. I think one of the things that the man should have tackled was the illegitimate birth rate in black culture. I wish Trump would have addressed it. I wish he would have addressed whites, Hispanics, whoever. Because think about, Vance, if like when I was teaching school, you show me, I'm being serious, you show me 25 kids that have genuinely bad behavior, detrimental behavior to their future, and I would guess about 20 of those are in one-parent homes or something dysfunctional. It's not just a relationship there. It's almost a direct line. And you're breaking down, it's a breaking down of society. It's not hyperbole, I believe that.
Yeah, and there's, I don't exactly know how you tackle this. Maybe one of the things you do, this is the kind of freedom mentality that I have, is maybe the state shouldn't have any part in marriage at all. And because when I look at how, in my limited experience, the few people I know that have gotten divorced and then gone through child custody, it appears to me that many of those child custody cases are really about are you going to be able to make it so the father pays for the children? And the way the father pays more money for the children is that he's not allowed to have time with them. Because if you do more equal time, then you don't give as much money. And I think the court system has been tilted in such a way that we are creating financial incentives to have fathers out of there as much as possible. Not on behalf of the fathers, but a financial incentive for these single moms who clearly need support, right? You can't raise a kid on your own. It's just too much work. Something's really off with the way our divorce is set up and the way we do child custody. And I think that leads to years later having major cultural things like incarceration rates that are through the roof.
Vance, there's no stigma, right? There's no stigma to being on welfare now. In other words, your SNAP card or your food stamp card looks like a credit card. If I'm behind you at Walmart or at Piggly Wiggly, I can't even tell if you're paying with food stamps or you're paying with a normal credit or debit card. That's where we're at. Now, you go back 60 years, people were given tins of, government cheese, government peanut butter. I believe that's where we should be at. You provide staples, you provide what's necessary to individuals, staple-wise. But now, you go into the gas station, you go into Walmart, EBT is everywhere. You can buy a Hershey bar. You can buy ice cream. You can buy Coke. You can use EBT in certain fast food joints. And I think it's an outrage. I think it's once again hurtful to those that you somewhat enslave by putting them into this avuncular governmental system, Uncle Government. And what you said about marriage, here's an example to me, Vance. You look at the issue of gay marriage, which has supposedly been resolved here over the last 5 years, Supreme Court and so on. I look at it quite simply, and I say, this has nothing to do, marriage, with our Constitution and SCOTUS. They should have kicked that to the states. That kicks, to me, right to the states. Hey, you in California, y'all do what you want, but we're not going to pretend that this is somehow in the Constitution. It's almost like the 10th Amendment is ignored now. Again, my opinion.
I couldn't tell you what the 10th Amendment is.
10th Amendment basically says, Vance, that if it's not here, right, if it's not enumerated right here, it kicks back to the states. And, that's partially Alito's argument in, I was going to say the recent abortion ruling, but that's not true. It's the recent rumored abortion ruling. And 10th Amendment, man, it's crucial. It's so crucial that it was put in the Bill of Rights, that Bill of Rights 1 through 10. If there's something in here that's not listed, then you can't take it and just do as you want with it. It kicks back to Maine or Mississippi and so on. Again, that's my opinion, but I think it's
well, and this leads us all the way back to where we were at in the beginning when we were talking about your article and people coming on your property. Is really the way that the federal government's power has been so increased is the bureaucracies and how much those bureaucracies are given budgets, and then those budgets are empowered to be put into things like the Farm Bill. And now all of a sudden, you have some organizations that say, hey, if I play ball with the USDA, then we're going to get these things for our members. Those members get that. I'm going to keep getting elected. And the more that they've done that, the more it's grown. I mean, you could say in large part that the farm organizations are responsible for the EBT being accepted on everything, because the more that they could get government money to buy food staples, the more money they made, right? Like there's definitely an unholy alliance that happens between those two things.
Right. And again, I want to use that word stigma. I think stigma in this instance is a good thing. I think a child that's raised up on welfare needs to know there's a stigma. They should not, have any sort of comfort level with it. And yet everyone flocks toward WIC. Everyone flocks toward SNAP, and it has actually become a normal segment of society. There's no shame element involved. I mean, I think I'm being a normal American when I say the last thing I want for my kids, the last thing on planet Earth is for them to end up on welfare of any form. Why? My Lord. I've got enough pride to say I don't want them to end up like that. What do you do, Vance, when you take that away and say, no, that's no problem. That's just another way to live. It's all good. No, sir. No, sir.
Well, I got to say, you are one of the very few people that would say openly that you want that stigma on people. As I think through this, I see your argument, right? I see the idea that social pressure is one of the most important things you have in a culture, because you can't have laws that prescribe the way that people should behave. You have to have social control through, hey, how does our society view this? How do your neighbors view this? But then that being said, would we be a better culture if we were making the people feel shame about it? I don't know. I mean, I think you're probably right to the extent that it would lower its demand, but you'd be putting a lot of pain into the world in a different way.
True. I think that's reasonable and a fair description by you. I just think it would be a better outcome in the end. Just like when Lyndon Johnson in the 1960s, and they're basically rehashing, reforming of the Great Society. On paper, looks really good. Hey, let's help take care of everybody. Well, now we're 70 years, 50 years, forgive my math, past that. And look what it's fostered. To me, it's fostered nothing but government dependence. It's fostered a revolving door of absolute dependency. So when you look at Kennedy's immigration plan from the 1960s, talking about Teddy Kennedy, talking about Teddy Kennedy's immigration plan, LBJ's Great Society, and you look at the outcome of these things, they start out looking really fine and nice, make everybody feel warm, and then they end up snapping back on America.
Yeah, and somebody is always paying for those things that are handouts. Someone is, the bill finally gets paid somewhere, and maybe it's our children's children, or maybe it's our lifetimes right now with inflation. Who knows? What do you think about the amount of homeless people that appear to be in places like, all the major cities, right? People living under bridges, tent cities coming up. Why has that become such a big thing lately?
Oof. Vance, I think there's a lot of factors at play there. And but by the way, before I give my answer there, just think we sent $40 billion to the Ukraine, and we have thousands of U.S. military veterans on the street, many of those with psychological problems. Anyway, I think in these major cities where the homeless flock to, they're not flocking there without reason. In other words, they know they are going to be cared for to a degree. So, in other words, if you were to set up a charity and you said, I want to go in and set up a charity and I believe I can take care or feed 1,000 homeless people a month, provide beds for them, what have you. At one level, that's a great thing. On one level, I would pat you on the back. On another level, I would say, oh, Lord, he's fixing to make the problem worse because you're providing more and more and more handouts. So it's, again, possibly a cruel answer, but I don't believe that the government can just hand people all of these charitable functions and not have repercussions. You go up to somewhere like, let's say, Springfield, Missouri, where freeways cross, and you look at the homeless problems there. Or you go to more famous cities like San Francisco. Again, the people flocking to those places know they're going to be fed or have congregants that they can associate with to some degree. So, in other words, you create a monster a little bit.
Yeah, it's been a shocking thing, right? Like you hear people talk about it on podcasts about how bad California's gotten, and then you go to Sacramento and you're like, whoa, there are people out here, like legit living in, thousands of people in a tent city, and you're just shocked by it. But when I look at human beings, I think there's very few human beings that want this, right? Like I think many of them are in that life because they somehow got pulled into the insane drug world that we have. And, the fentanyl that's coming out seems to be totally crazy, but meth was a really bad problem for a while. And I don't, to me, there's like my deep desire to have empathy and to try and exude care and compassion for people. But then at the same time being worried that your empathy can be hijacked and you can end up creating states where you're actually you're enabling really bad behaviors that don't help people over the long term.
Yeah, Vance, I think the homeless situation is an indictment of our modern society in many levels, many angles. And again, I don't have an answer except a harsh answer that will have a level of cruelty with it, and that is to move folks out, pull funds away, and I think it would have a sledgehammer effect initially. It would make things worse initially. I think it would improve things long term. But at least places like California, you mentioned Sacramento and San Francisco, it looks like the government's doubling down to me long term. So we may be headed to brave new world. Hooverville may be a piker's dream compared to what we're going to see over the next 20, 50 years there in those places.
What do you think about the increase in cannabis legalization? Bad thing or good thing for U.S. culture?
Well, I wrote an article one time that said, I can't remember the exact headline, something like, now is the time for marijuana for U.S. agriculture. I still believe that if it's going to be legalized in most states, then as my libertarian part of me says, hey, do as you will. I can honestly say myself, I don't smoke it. I don't want to. I don't want any of my loved ones to. I do believe it has a detrimental effect psychologically on many people. You and I could sit and drink, Vance, and it's very possible that alcohol would have no ill effects long term on us. But I know that person 3 and 4 might be addicted, or it might have really bad impact on them. I think marijuana has a heightened effect like that. I would guess that with the increasing legalization of marijuana, that the studies showing its detrimental effects I think they're going to be coming out for a long time. Having said all of that, you can't get the horse back in the barn, and I don't believe there's any going back from here. But let me add a caveat there. I don't think you should then logically go and tick off other drugs as well and make those legal.
Yeah, I have a sense. I personally think marijuana, like put into the world, is going to change culture, and I think all those people that were like, no, just legalize it, it's not going to change. That's not right. Like, it clearly is going to change culture. I personally believe that it's probably better than alcohol. I mean, I don't know, maybe their lung impacts are not as good, but as a guy that's definitely done dumb stuff on alcohol, I would say the ratio of between that and cannabis isn't even close. But I agree that for some people, they can handle having a couple of drinks, and no big deal, and other people go totally bananas on it. And as far as the wider legalization, oh man, I struggle with that because I really do want freedom. And when I say freedom, I mean a lot of freedom. But I also think, like, if you go look at those tent cities, you can see that those people taking those freedoms, or in a city like Seattle where you can have some pretty potent drugs and you're not going to get in trouble for it. I don't think that's made those places better. So it's hard for me to be like hanging a banner up and saying we should legalize everything. It's a lot of ambivalence on this one.
I don't think there's any good answer, Vance, and I think any position you take can be attacked and knocked down because there's no real answer here. You're really mixing so many terrible things at one time. Heroin,
To me,
for
the
example.
answer is the same one that you had on the Roe v. Wade. Like, we should be doubling down on federalism, or like as we call it in my network, fractal localism. Right, the closer you are to the individual, the more that individual. So I always say like I'm a communist with my immediate family. I'm a socialist with my wider family. And as I get further out in my town, I'm kind of just into democracy. And then when I get further out, like at the state or federal level, I really just want to know, are you protecting me, right? Are you keeping foreign invaders from coming? But outside of that, I don't want you to have any involvement at all. And I would love to see a movement towards that. Right now, all I see is a movement towards centralization. But
I agree, man. Like we should look at the state, what we have at state levels versus the federal level. Just picking one, Department of Education. We have a nationwide Department of Education, then we have Department of within the state. To me, screw that. You dump the nationwide Department of Education. Simply eliminate it. Let the states do as they will do. And then you go down through all of your departments and you do the same thing. Hey, I realize critics take some serious pot shots at me over that. But, I mean, come on. Almost every department we've got has a mirror at the state level. Imagine the waste, right? I can't even give you a number. I'd like for someone to come up with that, but imagine the financial waste of having double departments at all levels. You talk about bureaucracy tangle, that it's almost laughable if you explain that to a foreigner, right? If you explain someone coming from another country, and you explain to them you have the exact titles, exact Department of Education rules here, state rules. Woo! Mess.
Well, and when you have these federal bureaucracies that we were talking about before, the biggest thing that they have is no controls on their spending. Because when you're at the federal level, federal government can just keep issuing debt, can keep printing money, can keep those things going. But if you're in, say, like the state of Illinois, if you can't pay your bureaucrats because you don't have enough money, then you got to start. Well, you should have to start getting rid of them. I don't think they have, but that like. The other reason for having state control is that those budgets become real. And if you have your government not being the same group that can do your coinage, that forces them to have to live within the boundaries of some sort of reality. Whereas the federal government has no boundaries on reality. They can fund things forever. And like you had said, you really want to go get in a court case with the USDA. They have so many attorneys and infinite amounts of money, and no one ever has to pay for the fact that they were wrong if you prove that they were wrong.
There's no one getting fired, there's no one losing their pension. They might even get a raise out the deal.
Well, this has been ups and downs and doom loops and exciting books. It has been great to chat with you. If people wanted to look forward to your next story, what are they looking for? What's coming out next?
Oh, man, that's a heck of a question. That one I mentioned on the cottonmouths and the harvest of venom hopefully comes out in June. I've got an insane Hemingway tale I told you about a year ago. It's finally making its way. It should be out soon. Then I got a couple standard farm stories coming out, and if anybody's got a tip or a story I think I need to cover, please just holler at me, email me. My email is real simple: cbennett, CBENNETT @farmjournal.com, and I'll sure holler back at you.
Well, man, thank you so much as always for coming on, and we'll have you back on right after you read The Mandibles.
Hey, listen, it's been an absolute privilege to sit here and talk to the smartest guy in the room, and I don't know what your listeners, how much they know about your intellect. I suspect they only know a half of what you've really got, maybe even only a quarter. So thank you for your time. Thank you for having me on.
You're too kind, but always welcome on.